This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, this is a little bit of train the trainer on Dataviews here. And we are going to start with what are Dataviews and how can we illustrate to people how they work, what they are, things like that. So let's open up our SyteLine / CloudSuite session. And let's go to Dataview setup. I'm going to explain that, yeah, we've got out of the box, there are hundreds of Dataviews that are out here. Dataviews are used as ad hoc queries and also as reporting some of the actual reports there. You go to do the, say, the item detail report. That is a Dataview as well. Dataviews can be part of other forms like the home pages, a bunch of Dataviews there. You can embed a Dataview on a form if you'd like. What we're going to do here is just quickly look at a data view and see if I can find a nice see if I've got a nice simple data view. Okay, general ledger maybe. Yeah, there we go. All right, simple data view uses what's called an IDO collection, and we'll talk about what that is a little bit. But if we look at this IDO collection, what we're going to see in here is a lot of fields, tables. So if you're into SQL reporting, things like that, you have a SQL table, and then you've got columns and things like that. So for our IDO collection of our general ledger, which is our posted ledger transaction, we've got, the accounts, the unit codes, some attributes. We're going to have amounts, dates, things like that. And as you can see, I've got some of these checked, some are not checked. The ones that are checked should and would show up on the actual data view when I launch it. We'll get more into how that all works, but let's go ahead and launch this. And we have columns and rows. So those check marks that I had in the different data elements are showing up here. There's my credits and debits. There's my accounts, my unit codes, transaction dates, things like that. And once I'm in here, I can do a lot in terms of designing this form. I can take this, I can stack things if I want. Actually, I can stack things if I want. I can't stack that. Used to be able to stack stuff. There you go. So you can stack things, not that you probably want to, but sometimes you've got like an item and description you want on, the same column, if you will. Other thing you can do, you click on this, you can sort by that. I can go in and start to filter on things. I can go in and show my filters and say, let's say I just want to see my revenue account, my 4,000 revenue account. I can go select that down here, or if I wanted to find, okay, there's my 4,000, just select that. And voila, I've filtered on my 4,000 here. If I also wanted to do multiple selections, I can say, give me date ranges. And basically, this filtering is just like if you're using Excel filtering. As far as dates, you've got some added things here. You can go out and do periods, and I believe these quarters might be tied to the period totals, or I'm sorry, the accounting periods quarters, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So if I wanted to look at this quarter, nothing comes up because this is old data. Another thing I could do here is if I didn't want to necessarily filter on my revenue accounts, but I just wanted to have them grouped, I'll select all again here, and I can show my group bys. So if I show group bys, now I have the ability to take something here. If I drag that up into this group by box, what that's going to do is effectively create some pivot tables here for this. So of the general ledger transactions that I have in this collection, you can see all the different accounts, and you also see the number of records for each account. It's kind of cool, but that's not really telling me a whole lot, because really, what are my revenues? What's my total there? So you also have the ability here to put in totals. You go in here, you've got summaries. Those summaries can be a sum, or you could have an average total count of records, minimum and maximum. I'm not sure what that is. I've never used those. So I'm going to summarize this, and now I get to see my accounts here with actual totals, which is nice. Now that is set by, I've got them grouped right now by account. I'm going to drag that off of there and show my whole list again by account. But if I wanted to do it also by unit code, I can go ahead and say, show me all the groupings and summaries by unit code. Or if I wanted to do this, I can do multiple groupings here. So I can say by account and then by unit code 2. And so now I'm actually going to get my summaries here. So for account 1000, unit code, I'm sorry, 11,000, unit code 1,000, 2,000. Once I have this in here, if you wanted to, you could press the wrong button. You can send to, so I can actually fire that out to Excel. And when that happens, that is going to give me the spreadsheet with the same sort of pivot tables here that I had in the Dataview. If you didn't want the pivot tables on here, you can just get rid of your group by and send that to Excel, and that will just give you the straight list. Okay. So there are a lot of other things you can do with this. One thing that I like a lot is you can do what's called custom columns. And something I frequently do with date ranges here. Sometimes I want to group, not necessarily by date or quarter or something like that, but I will, excuse the construction noise. Let's see here, I will choose custom columns, and I am going to say transaction year. Okay, and that is going to be, got some choices here, but I'm going to make it a integer, okay, because the year is 2019 or whatever. I'm going to add that, and now it's going to say to me, well, what actually do you want to do with this custom column? So I can start to do some formulas in here. Those formulas could be, it could be a total, an average. I can go down here and use all of the data that's available in this data view. So I could do percentages, all that sort of stuff. In this particular case, I want to do a date format. So or I want to work with that date. So if you look over here, we've actually got some formulas for these things: date, time, engineering, financial, lookup, math, statistical. Could spend a week on that. But if we go here and look at date and time, I want to look at the year. There's a function in here called year, and I believe it's, I don't think there's anything different here than Excel for the most part. So if I say year and I double click on that, that's actually going to start to build my expression up here. And notice I've got a kind of a red warning here. This is really kind of doing syntax checks the whole way. So I want to express my transaction date as a year. Where's my transaction date? That's going to be down here in my columns. And if I go here, and I think it's going to be under T for transaction date. There's my transaction date. And I double click that. That puts it in my column. My little red warning goes away, which says you have a valid compilable formula up here. So I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to actually, you know what I want to do is I want to add one more here, and I'm going to call it month. And this is going to be an integer also, so I'll add that. And similar to what I did here, well, you know what? Let me just make sure that, yeah, transmonth, good. All right. So I can go in the advanced editor. So when I need to go back and redo something, there's my date and time. And go down here. Here's my month. Double click that. Builds my formula. Get my message. Go down here to my columns that I've defined. And let's go down to my transaction date again. Double click that. That's going to put it in here. I say OK, and I say OK. Where are my columns? When I add custom columns, they always go to the end of the rows, of end of the columns. So I've got some options here. I can take this thing and I can drag it over here. I can actually, see, I can't drag it here because I've got some, I forget what you call it, but like I've defined my first 4 or 5 rows on that thing. So I could put it here if I wanted to. The other thing I can do is, let's go back up here, make it single. Other thing you have the ability to do here, which is actually kind of cool, is to go into my choose columns. Okay. Now, you will notice here that by default, all these data elements here were the ones that we saw checked in blue when we were in the IDO setup. You can actually, once they're in there, you can turn those on and off if you'd like. But another very cool thing that you can do, actually let me cancel this for a second and go back to the beginning of my form. And display, choose columns. So I find these on the bottom. Instead of kind of finding them there and dragging them all over the place, I can take these guys here and just pull them up into where I want them. Which, if you've got a thing with a whole lot of columns, is a whole lot easier than kind of waiting for that thing to drag across the screen. Is year. And then I'll say OK. Now I've got this out here, so I can actually start to sort by my year. So 2016 is all I have in this particular database, but we will go to the month. I think we should see some additional months. I guess not. This brings us to another point. If we look at the number of records, so if I wanted to actually put a count on this, I've got summaries. I actually want to get a count of these records. I do that. Come down here, we notice 200 records. The default on your Dataviews is typically the default that comes up for your system default. So if we go up to use preferences, we've got that data record cap, default, retrieve all, specified. Because my default is 200 records, my data view, when I create them, I will say naturally will be 200 records, but doesn't need to be. So before I close this out, because if I close this out, all of these things that I just did in terms of adding this, these custom columns and the way I've switched things around would disappear. Because this is actually not stored necessarily in the data view IDO contents. This is stored in what's called the layout. So if I go here and look at this layout, I can, because I've created this, I'm going to save this as a layout, which is going to be DV train AT, and you can save that with the same scope that that you do any form changes in there. At the user level, site level, group level, I'm going to choose it for the site, and I'm going to make this the default, and press OK. Save was successful. So if I go out and close this and open it again, now for whatever reason, I think I have another default in here, so this did not actually default, but if I go to layout here and select it, there's my data view, and there are my custom columns. So that is kind of how you set up a layout briefly. Back to the whole record cap thing. I'm going to go out of this and go back to my my IDO setup. If you go into the actual IDO setup itself, when you create these, you basically say, what is your record cap? So even though the system tells you, like anytime you go somewhere, you get 200 records or whatever that is, you on any specific data view can change that. So if I said retrieve all, right, because remember I only was able to get 200 transactions, and those 200 transactions were all of April 2016. So are there more general ledger transactions in there? Maybe so. I could save it here, or you can also do this and go to the setup here. You've got some things that you can change, and record cap is one of them. So I'm going to say retrieve all. I'm going to save that, which is here, Control S. And then the one thing I am going to do anytime I make a change to a data view, always, 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 is I am going to clear my cache, which can be the Control U key, or you can come here. And what the cache is doing, that's just in my memory, because data views themselves and the settings that I have are they come from IDO, so they're stored in memory. You want to dump your memory every time you make a change so you can run it again. So I did that, or Control U, and you'll see that little thing spin around, and I launched this thing. I would expect to see more than 200 records, and I would also expect that this is going to take a little bit longer to run because I'm going through everything. And it certainly does. In the meantime, Suzanne asked me to go in and accept the meeting for tomorrow. I thought I did. Okay, so now we have some records here. And see, this thing is still kind of spinning. I'm going to accept my meeting here. Okay. All right, so it's done spinning here. If I look at my my summary, my grand total summaries now, that is 0. And every good accountant knows that your general ledger should always total 0. It's like a cold nose for a puppy dog. It's healthy. But here's my count. So I actually have 45,000 records here. And once I open up my my cap, my retrieval cap, I can do that. So now if I go in here and start to look at my options, actually let's do this. Let's go back to my, yep, I got that. Display my group bys. And now I can start to go in and see by year what that looks like. Again, 45,000 records in here. Takes a little bit longer. Or maybe a little longer than that. There we go. Okay, summary for each year is 0. That's healthy. But let's say here, I now want to start to look at this by account. So now I want to go see my 40,000 account. Move my filter. Mm-hmm. Not sure why that's not doing it. There we go. So select all for that. Where's my sales account? So now I can start to see. Actually, that is 0 because my year-end closing entry is probably out there. But you can basically get a beat here how I can go and change the layout, do columns, totals, things like that, get as many records as I want. And there's a whole lot more for the just how you actually work once you have a data view. There's a lot of things you can do in here. But what I'm going to do here is actually show a new data view. And the one thing I want to do is talk a little bit about this guy, this IDO, and what the IDO is. And let's give a practical example. I'm probably not going to go in here and start writing reports just for the heck of it. I'm probably going to want to do something of practical value. So the salesperson comes and says, I want to know all my orders for customers that are, over a certain amount or for a certain period of time or something like that. So the first thing for me to know is, like, how do I actually get into the data that I'm looking at? So if I create a new data view here, and we are going to call that new customer info data view. Okay, you can use spaces. You don't have to do it any way you want. You can name it something else if you want. And basically, all I need to do is have a name and then say, where do I start getting my data, right? So I want to get it from an IDO, of course. Well, there are a gazillion IDOs in here. And what is an IDO and what does that mean? Like, where do I actually get those columns of the customer name and the number and all that stuff? Good place to start is to understand what an IDO is and where it comes from. And I'm here on the customer screen for an example that if you look at the customer order screen here, I've got a lot of stuff here. I've got my customer number. I've got a ship to number, and I've got names here. I've got my terms code, addresses. There's a little red dot here. What does that mean? Well, that means they're actually on credit hold. Why are they on credit hold? There's the sales tax for this order. Here's the total price for that order. There's a ton of stuff here. Now, we're not actually looking at SQL tables, so I am going to flip back to a brief explanation of IDOs. So if we look at the customer order header here, we look at all those tables or all those data elements that I just described, they're actually coming from and pointing to ultimately different SQL tables. So you've got a customer ship to, which could be different than the actual bill to customer. And you have the customer number on that order, but that name, Carnival Cycles, is coming from a different table entirely. It's coming from the customer table. I've got my terms code. That's fine, but my terms description is actually coming from the table, the terms table. Same thing with ship via, our warehouse master. This is just loaded with data from multiple tables. And if we keep going on here, on the next page, you've got the salesperson, price codes, end users, your CRM stuff, leads, opportunities, things like that. What's going on, and the way Mongoose and SyteLine is designed, is that instead of you on that form actually going and making calls to a SQL table and things like that, which you'd need to know a lot more, SQL skills. And in the case of multi-tenant SaaS, you'd have to have access to the SQL database, which you don't. That doesn't mean you don't have access to the data, but you get the data through IDOs, and I think they're called intelligent data object. I don't remember what the acronym is, but basically what an IDO is it's a collection of data elements from typically multiple tables. There are some IDOs out there that are just for one table, but as an example, including but certainly not limited to, for your customer orders, you've got all these tables that are joined here and presented to you at the IDO level. So how does that actually happen? Let's go back into our application here. And as just as a practical example, I'm going to shut this down and I'm going to go into design mode here. And this is what I do when I want to know, like, okay, what is this? Where's my mouse? What is this field, right? Where do I find that? Well, I would go in here and go into design mode, and there's my total price. If I click on that, in this design mode, basically that's a whole nother class. But this is how the SyteLine developers create the application. This is how end users, or let's say customer users, can change this, personalize it. I can make things mandatory, add stuff, hide stuff. But I can also go in here and actually see what's going on a little bit. So I want to see what that number is. The first thing I actually want to do is, what is this? What's this collection that I'm looking at? Because it is an IDO or a series of IDOs that I'm pointing to. And as we looked at our kind of little layout, my IDO that I'm looking at, if I go down here to form, up at the top, you've got collections. That is, primary collection is the SLCOS, SyteLine Customer Orders. It's a little prefixed with SL dot, but don't worry about that. It's the SLCOS that I'm looking for. And if I go back to my component here of this, I go down, you've got a data source. This is where you actually bind this object, this price field, with the actual ultimately the database record through the IDO. Is the object is my collection, so I know that's SLCOs, and this is price. So if I go back in here to my Dataviews setup quickly, and I know it's SLCOS, right? If I don't know, I know it's SLCO something. I partially type it. If I press F2, I'll get a drop down about this. This too can be a whole nother topic of what all these things mean, because I've got CO alls and things like that. But back on that customer order form, I was looking at SLCOS, so I know that's the one that I want. And I'm just going to go here, and there's my SLCOS. Warning, big warning here. This is case sensitive, or at least it was in the last version. So if I were to type SLCOS lowercase, I could end up not getting the results I want and spending hours and hours and hours trying to figure it out. So here's my SLCOLs, and that's my IDO. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to go into setup. And what I should get here is a lot of columns. And if we kind of look down at some of these things, we've got some of those things we talked about. There's the bill to information for that customer. And then if we go down into the S's there, a little more, as there's the ship to information that's down there. My terms code, ST, QRST. I did really learn my alphabet. There's my terms code, term description. All that stuff is just in one place for me. So when I'm actually writing a report, I don't necessarily need to worry about table joins and go get this and inner join, outer join. It's here, and these IDOs have pretty much done that for me. So I'm going to start to select a couple of these. And that one thing that I was hunting down was called price, which is going to be under the P's. And I probably want maybe, let's see, my order date would be a good thing to do. Customer number. Oh, you know what? The sales manager asked me about it, so I should probably include sales information. For the most part, these things are fairly understandable. They're not, if you've ever worked with like Microsoft Dynamics or something, basically your custom order table is something SOXYZ something, and these are unintelligible, but a lot of this is kind of English languagey, so it's pretty easy to kind of understand what you're looking at. My customer number. If all else fails, you know how to get to the form and actually look at what that specific thing is. Cost would be good because I want to see how much I'm giving away. I got the customer order number, and you know what, who I sold it to is probably not a bad idea. So if I go up here, my bill to name, probably what I want, and maybe my state, name and state. So I've got that. It's using the system setting. Again, I can change it here or at the main screen, but I'm basically going to say, give me all the records. Now, one thing I know here about customer orders, and I just happen to know this, is that this IDO and this table, and the customer orders table, is used for, sorry, retrieve all. It's used for actual customer orders, but it's also used for estimates. And I happen to know that because I've been working with this for a while. I don't want to see the estimates. So within this, I also have a way to actually filter something. And if I click on my filter, this is going to bring me to that same list of all the IDO components that are there. You could search through it, or I happen to know that it's, or I think I know it's something like order type. If I go here and, nope, I think it might be just type. And in this particular case, I just happen to know this. I want it to not equal E, because E is the estimate type. And you get to know that by working with this. So I'm just going to add that and click OK. And what it's doing, you can see it's writing that in there. If I, you get advanced on this, you can actually go in here and type these filters, but I like using the menu. I'm going to click OK, and then I am going to save it. And what's the very next thing I'm going to do? I'm going to dump my cache because I made a change of it. So I'm going to do Control U. That works a little differently with the multi-tenant SaaS, by the way. And then I will go ahead and launch this. And let's see what happens. Look at that, lots of data. So let's take a look at this guy here. Let's go back to my customer orders and get out of design mode. But that order for $2 million, that's a pretty tasty order. That is my order number. So I can take that, copy that. If I wanted to go in here and find that, I can show my filters. And on my customer order number, which I did not put in here, so I cannot filter on that. But if I wanted to filter on the price, go here. This is a little bit acting weird. There we go. So let's clear it and say over $2 million. $2 million. All right, let's show my ignorance here. Let's go to number filters, greater than $2 million. And hit OK. And OK, so use the tools. Don't type your own formulas in. Lesson of the day. There's my order. And again, if I want to create columns, do whatever I want to do on this, save layouts, you can do that as well. Now, here, the purpose of this part was to just really talk about a little bit more about the IDOs. So I want to say just a little bit more about that. How do they happen, right? So how did this collection of data elements from various SQL tables get joined into one centralized place where I can just write a report and all that great stuff is there. That is in a table called the IDOs. Before we do the IDOs, what we're going to do is look at the actual SQL tables. Now, we do not have access to the SQL database, but what we do have is through the Mongoose layer, we actually have access to the SQL tables that are in SyteLine, CloudSuite. And if we go back to our example here, we've got, excuse me, some tables that I know of for sure, customer, warehouse terms, things like that. This says be very, very careful because you can mess things up, and you can. And by the way, I can do this because I am in as system administrator, or if I'm not system administrator, to be able to access this requires a developer's license. So with SyteLine, you kind of naturally get the ability to have one developer license, which is logging in as SA. If you have the need for more than that, you actually have to get an additional developer's license. But the times that you actually need to be in these forms, like everything I did with the Dataviews and going into design mode, you don't need a developer license. I don't need to be SA for that. Only certain tables here, the SQL tables and the IDOs, that will show up. Okay, so we're automatically in filter mode here. And table name, well, filter works like everything else. So let's take a look at everything that looks like customers. And we've got a pretty short list, but we've got some customer contact, probably not customer currency, and then these customer MST and MST all. Longer story about the all tables. If you're in multi-site, that has to do with replication. Yeah, that's like chapter 3. The main tables, typically if we go back, kind of look at our example there, I've got just customer, things like that. In the SQL database there, they've got a suffix of underscore MST for master, customer master. So there are my tables. If I wanted to see the actual fields, or they call them columns here, I'm on my customer master, choose my columns. And here I've got all of my columns that have to do with the customer itself. Okay, so this is really, I'm looking at what the SQL table is defined as. Again, I really am not going to get data directly from making any calls to a customer underscore master or anything like that. I just wanted to illustrate that they are in here. You actually have the ability here to create your own. So if I wanted to go ahead and create a new SQL table, I could do that. I can create indexes. You see down here all the indexing that's happened. I can create my columns, all that sort of stuff. They're not going to do you any good unless you join them with or pair them up with an IDO. But you can. So you can create a lot of things in here. But I'm going to hop out of the SQL tables because we wanted to talk about IDOs. And I'm going to open a form called IDOs. And by the way, the ability to create SQL tables and everything I'm showing you here, in fact, everything I'm showing you works exactly the same, whether you've got on-premise or you're hosted with, Aptrix or something, or you're doing multi-tenant SaaS. So let's go to IDOs and let's take a look at an IDO that is near and dear to us, which is our SLCOS. I know it's SLCOS. I don't know how to type, but I know that. Now notice No caps here, doesn't matter because I'm filtering. When you do create data views, be mindful of that. So if I look here at my SLCOS and we go back and let's go back to our example here, we've got all of these things, price code, warehouse, all this stuff, right? I'll go back here and let's take a look. Well, lo and behold, here are customer files. Customer address is actually where the name is stored. My customer type, there's my currency. Keep going down here. I'm going to see my, and you can actually have multiple instances of the same table. So I've got customer in here defined 3 times. You just give it an alias, and when you actually create the table in here with the alias, you choose how you actually want to join that. And the reason we've got 3 customers, one of them is a bill to, all right? One of them is a ship to, which is up here, and one of them would be the corporate customer if you had one. And if you go back and look at that customer form or a customer order form, you've got all those 3 things on the form, so you need to actually have those in the IDO. There's my delivery terms, tax code, ship via is going to be in there. So all those things, in fact, you can see what a wimpy little truncated list of tables I have in here just for illustration. There's a ton of stuff here. Okay, so first thing you do with an IDO is I'm going to say, okay, here's my IDO. What do I want to display there? Now, happily, the fine developers at Infor have worked out 98% of your needs here so that you don't have to deal with any of this. But like I said, if you wanted to create your own table, and let's say you want I don't know, you're doing a new implementation, and for instance, you want to import all of the history jobs, but you don't want to put them in the work order table, the jobs table in SyteLine, because that'll clog it up. But I just want to have this other lookup table that's out there of my part number, my job number, how much it costs, and when I made it. You could create a SQL table, create a simple IDO, points to that, and then you actually create your properties. So if I click on my properties here, I look at, okay, all these properties are for my SLCOS. IDO, and I've got all of these names. So now you notice this is kind of where the English name's coming up, or the Englishy name on the IDO. But here I'm pointing to, like, when I do this property, what kind of property is this? A lot of them are just bound to a column, and bound to a column means it's just pointing to one of the SQL fields on one of the SQL tables that I have created in this IDO. In this particular case, my corporate customer is pointing to my customer address 0, right? Which if we go back here and look at our IDO property joins, I've got that customer address 0, right? So there it is. And it is pointing to custom there. So this basically is how you get from a SQL table to this presentation layer of the IDOs. And I'm tempted, but I'm not going to. We'll do another one on that to create IDOs, because I can create a new IDO. The other thing I can do, just so you know, let's say there's some stuff in here that I don't have. Somehow maybe I want to get, I don't know, I want to join something else entirely different that's in here? Well, there's a couple of ways you can do that. On that custom order screen, I can actually have multiple IDOs. They're called sub-collections. Or if this is going to be, I want this present everywhere I have custom orders, you actually can take an existing IDO and you can, excuse me, click new IDO. Now this is, if I start typing, I'll just create a new one. But the other thing that you can do is you can, all right, let me just fill in some required stuff here. All right, it's not going to let me. But you can actually extend an existing IDO. So if I wanted to take this, I'm not going to save that. If I want to take this SCOS and do some stuff with it, add some things to it, I can't take things away because that'd mess up the application. But I can add things and sort of, yeah, add my own touches to it. I can extend this one, rename it, and then everywhere else in the system that thought it was looking at the SLCOLs will now look at mine and all of the goodies that I put in there. Anyway, that got a little bit down a rabbit hole, but I wanted to just kind of explain where the data comes from when you're actually building a data view, right? And I look now at my SLCOs here, and I come up with this data, and I've got all these columns of stuff here. Now you kind of know exactly what this is. I see cus 0 cus type. Now I kind of know what that is, right? That's the build to customer type that's out there. So all these things are happily brought to you by Mongoose and the IDO machines. And when you're out here creating your data views, if you're really kind of looking to just start with, hey, I want a report of my, I don't know, my custom orders. How do I do that? Again, we go back to whatever form you're looking at. So if you're in anywhere in the application and you say, where is that? I want that. You can go out there and just quickly go into design mode, find that data element. Okay, first thing I want to know is what's my collection, right? My collections, SLCOs, that's my IDO, right? Go down here to the component, and where's my binding? So that's the SLCO's projected date. So great, now I know what that is. I can go back in my IDO and I can put that in there. But let's say that here I actually want on my line items, on my line items, I have part numbers, right? And that's in this particular case a power boat and things like that. Now, this line item information isn't necessarily all this stuff, my price, my due date. That's not really necessarily on my SLCO's IDO. So what do I do in that particular case? I would go in and, as we know, an IDO is just really a collection of tables joined together. Well, a data view is really a collection of, or can be a collection of IDOs joined together. So if I look at this, items, I happen to know this because I've been working with it for a while, my SLCO items. I actually want to include that on my data view. And what I want to do is I also want to retrieve all. Here, I'm going to do that there. And I'm going to save that. Now I am going to get an error message because it basically I'm specifying a relationship Or I'm saying there's two IDOs here, but I'm not giving a relationship of those IDOs. So what I really have to do here is I've got to say, all right, one of these is going to be a parent IDO. Chicken or egg, where do I start? All right, here I'm going to go down to the SL items, drop down, and the only logical candidate is the SLCOs. So I'm going to do that, and I will save it. And now it's going to be all happy, and I'm going to launch my report, and what's going to happen is I'm going to get a pretty simple report of my customer order header. Well, there's no line information there because I have not really specified any. So if I go down to the IDO setup for the items there, I am going to, let's just say I'll pick, now notice here, this is interesting. I'm actually on the CO items IDO, but I have address information in here. And I have, if I go down here, I've got information from the actual customer order itself. So it's pretty amazing once you get to know the IDOs, like how much stuff is actually in one place that you don't have to do things. I'm doing it here because I want to prove a point, but let's just say my customer number and my item. So I don't even need the customer number because I know that, but I'll go here, choose my item. I'm going to save that. I'm going to save my data view. You always got to save your changes. I'm going to dump my cache, and I'm going to run that. And I'm hoping to get this error, but I think they actually, very interesting. I would have expected an error because what I haven't done here, you don't see an item and a customer number. Actually, you do, but that was on the original. You don't see my part number here because I have not really defined this relationship. I said there is a relationship, but I haven't really defined it. So it used to be like you get this really nasty, ugly error that I wanted to show you, but now you just don't see your item. So if I go into the IDO setup here, what I need to do is I need to say, okay, between my IDO of SL items and my parent IDO, how do I associate those? How do I know which customer order line items are associated with any given order? Again, I happen to know this. It's the CO number that is in there. Again, caps matter here, or they used to. So I'm basically going to say where the customer order item CO number equals the customer order CO number. I'm going to add that, and there's a choice here that I have of whether I want it single level or multiple level. And in this particular case, I actually have typically more than one, or I can't have multiple customer order line items for one CO. So basically, I would like to see my customer order information, then below it, my line item information. I'll choose multi-level. If for some reason I wanted it all on one line, maybe you're dealing with stuff that's got a one-to-one relationship, or instead you just want one line. If I choose single level, what it would do is it's just going to print me one line per customer order item record, but it's just going to repeat the order header information on every line. So I'm going to choose this, and I'm going to not hit OK here. And this is something I do 50% of the time, is I hit OK before I actually press add. You got to make sure that's in there, or else it's not going to do you much good. Since I'm in here, I might as well get into some other useful information like what was my description. Should be in here. One thing that is baffling to me is everywhere in SyteLine you can filter on stuff except in here. I've actually done a version of this report that lets you filter in there, but the standard one doesn't. So you're doing some hunt and peck type stuff here. Description. Okay. Well, there is one thing here that we're going to come back to. You see these DER properties in an IDO? Those are derived properties. We'll talk about them in a second. So I'm just going to find the description. If I ever get rid of the DERs, there's my description. I'm going to do that. I have this in here. I'm going to say, okay. Then I am going to save it. I am going to hit Control U to dump my cache. Then I'm going to launch this. And hopefully I will see a multi-level data view with header information and line item information in that. Maybe if I actually hit launch. Okay, there we go. There's my header information that I saw, but now I got this little plus sign here. And if I expand that, now I've got the information of my line items. So what I've done here is I have gone into this data view. I created data view. Those IDOs, just a collection of tables. Now what I'm doing here is I'm making a collection of IDOs. In this particular case, maybe I wanted to find that part number and then go find the product code and the distribution account on the product code and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of weird, obscure stuff that wouldn't be in the CO item IDO. What I do is I go in there, I add another IDO of my maybe my items table that's got the product code in it, and then I would have the product code table that I would join to the item with the distribution account, blah, blah, blah. So there is so much that you can do and find and join in these data views on top of the way that Infor Mongoose has the IDO collections defined. Getting back to one thing I mentioned, I'm going to go back to IDOs again. And I mentioned we had a bunch of derived fields. I did show on those properties how the certain properties are bound to columns. Okay, so let's look at our SLCOS again. And we'll go into our properties. And we have here bound to column, and we went over that, and it's pointing to custom order. This is pointing to my customer bill to address, all that sort of stuff. These are all when you're actually linking an IDO property directly to a column. But there's another thing that you can do here when you're either consuming or creating IDOs. Bound to column, you basically have a derived IDO, and I'm going to filter on all the derived IDOs in the SLCOS, or properties, derived properties in the SLCOS IDOs. And you see that DER, and that's kind of the naming convention in Mongoose. So when you see that, you know that something else is going on there. So let's look at something that's probably going to have item count. Let's see, do I ship via, ship to address? Let me find something interesting. Has CO shipped? Okay, there's something. That's going to be a flag. Has this customer shipped? What is it? If we go here, now that we're in derived, this tab opens up for implementation, and implementation simply means how do I define this? This is a really simple one here. It's just going to find another record. Let me find something that's doing something interesting here. Okay, here's one. So derived price basis. And what this is doing here, select top one, blah, 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 blah. There's actual SQL code going on in here so that I can, if I wanted to, I could write little formulas. You know, for instance, in the item master, there's quantity on hand and stuff like that. Those are derived because they're actually going out and doing a SQL summary statement of all the inventory in the multiple warehouses. But what it does is it returns one record, so that when I'm actually on that that form, that custom order form, I've got, or the items form, I've got this ability to, you know, not just pull a bunch of tables together, but to actually do calculations, do validations and things like that, and return them in a single value for my form. The other thing here that we talked about is there are sub collections as well, which this is getting a little bit advanced, but within that SLCOS, you've got sub collections. And for instance, we look at CO items. If I go to my custom order header, I go to the main thing, you got this thing down here, which is basically my line item detail, which is kind of cool. Where's that coming from, though, is that is actually coming from a sub collection that I created on my, I think I just broke something here. Yeah, I did. That's coming from a sub collection that I've defined in the IDO itself. So that kind of that trick that I did in the Dataviews setup, where I'm joining multiple IDOs and things like that. There are places in SyteLine where the actual IDO itself is already doing that. In this particular case, it's looking at, yeah, it's not coming back. It's looking at bring back the IDO collection of all of the custom order line items here, so I can just show them on the front screen. So if I went into my, there we go, detail. Yeah, it didn't go well. Anyway, sub collections, in this particular case, there's my SLCO items, so that exists on this IDO. It's possible in Dataviews that you can use sub collections as well. I think that's a little advanced, but in any event, back to Dataviews, IDOs, collections, joining IDOs, joining multiple IDOs. If you look at some of these things in here, you've got some pretty gnarly, and that's not one of them. Move up here on the top, that's payable aging. Let's see if that's up there. Available to ship. Of course, opportunities. This might be one. So, yeah, customer orders, orders and shipments. Yeah, there's some in here that have, you know, 10 different IDOs that are in here that are set up. One thing that's always good to do is you can actually get in here and look at existing ones and say, hey, how do they do that? In this particular case, get this order by. I can kind of intuit here that you actually can sort these things by customer order number, descending or ascending, and things like that. So lots to do in here. And for now, I think we're going to call it a day. So that was the That was the down through the squirrel hole session on Dataviews. And we will say goodbye.